Grief is real, big, better shared. The podcast everyone needs to hear, but nobody wants to hear.
I'm Diane Brockmeyer, the CEO of Mid-America Transplant, and we are honored to sponsor this episode of Grief is Real, Big, Better Shared. At Mid-America Transplant, we have the privilege of working with families across southern Missouri and northeast Arkansas who choose to donate their loved ones' organs or tissues. While donation often brings families comfort, they are still heartbroken by their loss. We are proud to work with the Center for Good Grief and appreciate everything they are doing in the region to help bring healing to people who are coping with loss. Grief support is especially meaningful to me, as it was a tremendous help to my daughter, who lost her dad when she was 7 years old. 20 years later, she still recalls the positive, safe feelings she had with her grief support group. They understood her. Mid-America Transplant is inspired by life and by the donor families who give transplant patients a second chance. For more information about becoming a donor, visit sayyesgivelife.org.
Hello, welcome to Grief is Real, Big, Better Shared, the podcast everyone needs to hear, but nobody wants to hear. I'm Angela Hamblin-Kelly, the administrator of the Baptist Centers for Good Grief, and I am joined here today with two of my incredible colleagues to talk about grieving during the holidays. We are going to divide this topic into two episodes. So today we will focus on grief and Thanksgiving, and then in 2 weeks we will release part 2, more on grief and the holidays. Today we want to start with a real and open talk about grief and Thanksgiving. So in order for us to do that, I have two colleagues here with me, Erin and Carolyn. And before we get started, why don't you two just kind of take a minute to introduce yourselves?
Well, I'm Erin Robbins, and I have been working at the Grief Center for 5 years. And a lot of times people ask, why we do this work. And I just find it so rewarding to walk with clients through difficult times. And I find that they inspire me so much and teach me so much. And so that's why I enjoy doing this.
I'm Carolyn Danley, and I've been at the Grief Center as an employee for about 6 or 7 years, but been involved as a volunteer for many years before. And it's such rewarding work because although we do hear difficult stories every day, hard things about people's grief, they're love stories. And so we get to hear love stories all day long. And so it's hard work, but so rewarding.
I'm so glad that you both are here. I love being witness to the work that you both do and with our clients. And I think this is going to be a really helpful conversation for folks as they prepare for Thanksgiving. So before we jump into grief and Thanksgiving, I think, we always just have to start off with what is grief in general?
Well, at the Grief Center, a lot of times we say that grief is all the thoughts and all the feelings that kind of run around inside of us and our bodies and in our emotions, when somebody that we love dies. So, that's just what we think about when we think about grief. It's all of the things. It's not necessarily just sadness, but it's all of these experiences that we deal with. And again, like I said, we usually think of it as sadness, but, there are so many different ways that we grieve that's not just emotional. Emotional is a big one, but we also grieve physically and, psychologically what's going on in our brains and what's going on in our spirit, spiritually and behaviorally. How does our behavior change when grief comes into our life? So there's a lot of different aspects of grieving. And we also seem to see a lot of times that grief comes in waves, and that is a helpful kind of visualization of grief that people can see when we explain it, that the grief will wash over you, come out of nowhere, just hit you like a big powerful wave in the ocean sometimes. So that can help people to understand grief a little bit more.
Absolutely. And I think to go along with the waves, grief image that you described there, the holidays are oftentimes a really big wave. It's that wave out in the ocean, I think, that people can see. They see it coming. There can be a panic when they see that wave coming. It's marked on the calendar. It's in all the advertisements. I mean, it is coming for us. And that can be extremely overwhelming. And so that's why we're doing this. So this is a wave we can see. We know it's coming. We know and believe very much that it's a better way to cope with having a plan for the holidays. And we're gonna talk about that. What are some actual practical tips? But first, let's talk about what makes that wave of the holidays and seeing it coming. What makes that so tough?
Right. And part of what makes grief so tough is grief is tough on any day, just a given Tuesday. Grief is hard. The emotions, the intensity. But when you add the holidays in there, it's something that everyone is experiencing. It's so focused on family. The commercials are always showing families sitting down to dinner together. The Hallmark movies that have already started, I've seen, are showing all the family celebrations and such focus on how are you spending the holidays with your family. And so all that focus on family, when maybe a member of your family is missing, can be very hard to kind of reconcile, and then also the added stress of the holidays.
Sure.
When you're not grieving, the holidays are a stressful time, right? I had someone say one time, it's like you decide you're going to send everyone you know a note. You're going to buy everyone you know a gift. You're going to redecorate every room in your house, all at the holidays. And so it's a stressful time anyway. And then when you add how grief affects you, as Erin was saying earlier, it affects you physically, it affects you emotionally, psychologically, spiritually, all those things that come into play that take a lot of energy, and the holidays take extra energy. And so we can really become very kind of depleted and add that extra feeling of stress and overwhelmed.
I love that you said that about grief is hard on a normal Tuesday, because I think that's a question or a comment that we get the most is, well, I was doing so well. Now, why is it so hard? Or why am I going backwards? Why am I doing worse? And it's because grief is hard on a normal day. And then here is that giant wave of the holidays. And I think that's one of those things that we just have to stress, that it just magnifies all of those ways we grieve that Erin said. Everything is magnified. Yeah.
That's interesting that you bring that up, because I have noticed when I've met with clients recently that they were kind of feeling like they were doing better. And then as we approach the holidays, I'm seeing them come in and kind of be like, oh, it was a hard day. It was a hard week. And I don't know why. And I'm like, I probably know a little bit why, maybe. The holidays are coming and we're already feeling it. And sometimes our bodies even feel it coming before we cognitively realize it.
Absolutely.
Yes.
The weather change or scents. Yeah.
You notice the time of day that it gets darker and just all those things that are sort of triggers to your body that it's coming.
And I went into Home Depot the other day and Christmas trees are already up. So, people are seeing those cues and maybe not connecting it to their grief.
Absolutely.
But they're already sensory things in the environment that are leading them to that grief. So, and grief is a time for remembering, and I think that can be a really difficult part of the holiday experience when you're grieving, because even in normal holidays when you're not grieving, we're remembering all of those holiday memories, the past, what we've done, those holiday traditions that are important to us and our families. And then here we kind of have, a person who has been a part of those memories before, but they are not going to be going forward. And that can be very difficult to experience during the holiday season. So, it's like you're already thinking about the past.
Right.
And now, you have this pain related to the past. And so that can be difficult. And also just all of the buildup, it's such an anticipatory time, right? Because you're leading up to these specific dates, but there's weeks that you have to live through, and all of these different kind of touch points, children's programs in school, or, holiday parties for work or things like that. There's all of these different little events leading up to the big events. Yes. And so your grief can be kind of triggered and activated at every one of those little touch points. And so that can just create a buildup of grief as we head towards those dates.
Yes, Erin, and you were talking about the past, focus on the past. And, with the holidays, there's so much focus on tradition. Many of us have, we always do this. The day before Thanksgiving, we do this. I always cook with my mom. And then on the day of, we always have a football game in the yard, and all these traditions that you're used to. And so many times people can become almost paralyzed because they think, well, what am I going to do this year? Because everything is different. And I know myself when my own father died, that first Thanksgiving, right afterwards, we decided we were going to, just make everything the same. We were trying hard to make it just the best Thanksgiving. And so I went and stayed with my mom, and we cooked and prepared. And, it was one of those Memphis Thanksgivings where it's 85 degrees and sunny, not very Thanksgiving-y feeling. And our tradition was always to have a fire, and my dad and his friend would always sit there by the fire cracking nuts, and everything. Oh, yeah. So Mom and I were trying to make it all just like that. And it was 85. So we turned the air down in the house, really cold, and built the fire anyway. Oh. Well, the air conditioner drew all of the smoke into the house. And so the house filled up with smoke. The smoke alarms were going off. People were about to start arriving. My mom and I opened the doors, the big sliding glass doors, to get all the smoke out of the house. And when we did, a squirrel came in the house. And so my mother and I are running around the house chasing this squirrel. We finally end up in her pantry, just sitting in the floor and just a puddle of tears, just crying, because it's like we were trying so hard to make it like it was. And there was nothing we could do that was going to make it like it was. And so you have to, give yourself permission to do something different this year. And
I just have to interject that you were trying so hard to make it the past, but the circumstances made it a reflection of what it really was,
exactly.
Right?
A mess.
So a mess.
Yes.
Yes. Oh. Yes.
And like our own little Christmas vacation movie.
Right.
and yes. And so take the pressure off of yourself to try to make it like it was, because there's no way to make it like it was. And so you have to give yourself permission to do something different sometimes.
And I do think those past traditions sometimes can be the hardest, because there's so many emotions and just so many triggers that come with it. I've heard so many clients over the years talk about past traditions and come to food. As families, we gather with food, and food is a connector and a trigger to our grief sometimes with the holidays. And this podcast, we are not here to discuss if it's dressing versus stuffing, but
it's dressing, by the way.
Yeah, it's dressing.
That is certainly a big item I've heard from people over the years is, well, who's going to make it now? And it's not going to be right. And I'm going to try, or we're not having it. Or, I've sat with a lot of people with tears over dressing because of that past tradition of, I'm thinking of several clients who said, I started out as a child on the stool next to my grandmother, learning, doing the cornbread and all these things. And so I think we have to remember that oftentimes with grief, it's really more of those little things. And I think as people, we don't allow ourselves to think about the little things, but those little things connect to the memories and to the feelings. And a lot of that with the holidays with grief is through those traditions, and a lot of times with food.
Absolutely. And you hear clients say all the time, it's just not Thanksgiving without whatever that is for them.
Right.
And, it can be so difficult to bring that tradition into the holidays, with that person not being there, or, with things just change so much.
Those little things hold a lot within them.
Absolutely.
I'm the person now in the family that makes the dressing, and I'll tell you, I am sad, and I think about it every Thanksgiving. I wish somehow somebody had kept my grandmother's pan that she made it in. Every year when I make it, I think, oh, I think it'd be so much better if it was actually in her pan, But it's a thought and a memory, and we tell that story. And so that's a nice connecting thing for us, even though we don't have the pan. Yeah. So, well, in this episode, we are going to talk specifically about Thanksgiving and address how thankfulness can be a reality and a difficulty when we're grieving. We hear that a lot, grief and gratitude and thankfulness. And so let's talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, this is a entire holiday based around being thankful and grateful. And that can be an incredibly difficult emotion to access when you're grieving. And it is possible, obviously, to hold multiple feelings at one time. So you may be able to hold some thankfulness and gratitude in one hand and your grief in the other. And that's what we hope. Mm-hmm. But we also really want to acknowledge how difficult that is and how you may not be feeling very thankful or grateful during this time of year.
Absolutely.
And so that's a big contrast to what it seems like the rest of the world is feeling. So you can feel really out of place while it seems like the whole world is focused on this feeling that's very difficult for you to access right now. And that's okay, So we just want to acknowledge that it's very hard to be thankful during this time. Your whole entire world has changed and you didn't want it to. And you can be having lots of feelings of, sadness and anger, bitterness and resentment, which is totally, normal and understandable while you're grieving, but it can make you feel like a failure at Thanksgiving, right? Like you're failing at this time of year, or you're failing your family, or things like that. And it's not a failure. It's just where you are in this moment in time as you are experiencing this holiday with your grief. And it doesn't mean anything about you. It just means this is where you are with your grief right now. So I think there's a lot of self-acceptance and self-compassion during this time of year, that it's okay that you're not how you usually are,
right,
or how you may expect yourself to be, or others may expect you to be because they don't understand your grief. That's a big part of it too, is the expectations of other people. You may hear things, people may say things to you that are a little bit hurtful because they don't think that you're experiencing enough gratitude at Thanksgiving. Right. And that can be very hurtful. So.
And there's no magical recipe for coping with grief. We've talked about that a lot here. In general, it takes a lot of time, patience, and all the coping skills you can muster. Here at the Baptist Centers for Good Grief, we spend a lot of time talking about coping skills. And in general, today we're going to talk about coping with the holidays specifically. So as promised, we're going to dive into some practical tips to help people cope. Like, as Erin said, during this time of thankfulness and gratitude when maybe you're not feeling that way. So let's talk about practical ways.
Well, and I think one of the biggest things is awareness, being aware. And so we need to expect to feel our grief at the holidays. And so regardless of whether the focus is on thankfulness and gratefulness and family, we expect to feel our grief at the same time. And many times I'll hear clients say, I just want to go under the covers, pull them over my head until January 1st and just skip all of it. But even if you did, you're still going to feel it. You're going to feel your grief. You're going to know it's there. You're going to know it's the holiday time. And so just expect to feel that and spend time allowing it and allowing that grief. Whether you feel any moments of that thankfulness or gratefulness or not. And just really kind of allow all those feelings. Allow yourself to feel whatever you feel. it can be confusing when we feel two feelings at the same time. But most of the time we do. We feel joy and sorrow together. Many times we feel happiness and then at the same time we feel pain. And so allowing yourself to feel whatever it is you feel during the holidays and express that, and don't feel you have to put on this mask of this happy face for everyone else, because it is a time to focus on your own feelings and how you are feeling.
I had a client once during the holidays. She just was struggling so much with the intensity because she thought she was doing better, in the previous months. So she put a sticky note. Actually, she put them in multiple places, but on her bathroom mirror that said, "I am grieving." And so she would say that out loud to herself to remind herself, because and you were talking about this, she was getting messages from other people like, "You should be happy. This is a great time of the year. This is your favorite time of the year." And so it became a mantra for her, is that she had to say, "I am grieving. That is why I feel this way," because she was so afraid she was going backwards or, becoming depressed, things like that.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And that people will comment that friends and family say, "Well, you just need to be grateful for the time you had with them. You need to be thankful that you had those 20 years or that 30 years. And you may be, but it doesn't change the fact that you have lost this person and you miss them. And so being able to acknowledge both of those. And I love that visual, Erin, like you said, of holding it in each hand, holding both in each hand.
That's exactly what I was just thinking. In one hand, I am holding the gratitude for 20 years.
Yes.
But in this hand, I wanted more.
I feel cheated that I didn't get the next
and
20.
You can have both.
Right.
You can have both.
Yeah, you can have both at the same time. And I think a lot of times we expect to feel one thing at a time. Mm-hmm. And feeling, two things at a time can be very difficult. Right. It can just feel very heavy.
Right.
But that's a lot of times what grief is holding multiple feelings at the same time, multiple experiences. And I think it can be hurtful when people tell you that you should be grateful. Yes. Like they're assuming that you're not.
Right.
Right. And it's like, well, I am. know, I don't need you to tell me to be grateful. I am. But I'm also grieving. Right. Like the sticky note. So I think that acknowledgement of all of these feelings and all of this heaviness and expecting that this holiday is going to be different can help you to understand that you're not going to be the same this year, and maybe you need to kind of make a different plan, right? A different way of experiencing this holiday than maybe you have before, because things are different. And Carolyn told the story of trying to make things the same and how it kind of went sideways. And maybe, you need to change the plan before we even get there, right? And maybe try to think about a different way to experience this holiday that will work for you. And that's okay. It's okay to make a plan that you think is going to work for you, that's going to take care of you that day, and maybe is a little bit less intense than what you normally do. We talk to a lot of clients that are very much the planner or the caretaker of the holiday, right? And they think, well, I have to do these certain things to make this holiday go the way it's supposed to go for all the other people, right? And it's like, well, you may need to let people know this year that you can't do as much as you normally do, that, you need to take some time out for yourself, or you need to modify the plan to just be a little bit less than what you normally do. So,
and when we talk about a plan, we mean get out some paper and a pen and write it down. And like Carolyn was saying, for some people, it's maybe starts the day before, because maybe the day before Thanksgiving is when a lot of the traditions were, or maybe it's Friday with shopping and things, or maybe it's into the weekend. So like writing it down. And what do you feel like you must have, and what do you feel like you could do different? And when you said that, Erin, I was thinking, I have a client this year that, again, with the dressing, she's like, we have to have the dressing, but we're not having turkey.
Right.
We're having steak because that's easy and manageable, and it's different. And I think I think the turkey will just be too much. And so that's their plan of what do I feel like I really have to have and what can be different. But then having plan B, plan C.
Giving yourself lots of grace if that does not feel right on that day.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yes.
I love that so much because when I talk to clients a lot of times and I'll bring up an alternative to their plan, it's like a light bulb goes off like, oh yeah, I can change it. Because I think, and I know I do this in my own life too, like I have to do it this certain way and you feel kind of stuck in that. And it's like, no, it's almost like they need permission to think outside of the box. If you're listening to this podcast, you have permission to think outside of the box for Thanksgiving and or any holiday or special day that you can change the way that you do it to fit what you need. Because what's important is that you get what you need out of this day, not that you perform in a certain way. So, yes, I love that. Take a pad and pencil and write down your plan and then realize that as the day comes or you're in the middle of the day and it's not working, you can erase something and change the plan because it's all about your needs and getting through the day how you need to.
And know also that there's no pressure that what you do this year is what you have to do forever. It doesn't have to be the new tradition. What you're doing does not have to be the new tradition for the next 20 years. It's just what feels right this year.
That's so important to remember because I do think that people think, oh, well, this is the new tradition. Whatever I do this year, after the death of this loved one, this means that this is the way we're going to do it from here on out.
And I don't want to set us up for a sad, terrible tradition for the next 20 years.
Exactly.
I think, too, we have to address here because we get asked this a lot. Well, what if my plan is to do nothing? Or like Carolyn, you said earlier, like, well, my plan is I'm going to stay in bed.
Yeah, we do hear that a lot. Yeah.
And sometimes that's okay to have permission. And because sometimes that's what people need if we go back to our needs. But if you're listening to this podcast and that's what you're thinking, I encourage you to get that pad and pen out and what's something else you can add to the plan. What's some sort of memorialization or remembrance that you can add? Who can you add to your plan? Who can you reach out to and get some support from that day, even if it is while you are in the bed, but having some sort of additions to your plan.
I love that because you don't want to be totally isolated. So like you said, even if you reach out from your bed, reaching out to a safe person that you know is going to validate your grief, can be a really important part of your plan. Or I love the idea of if you're going to stay home and stay in bed, plan a day of self-care. Plan a day of things that are going to make you feel pampered and taken care of. That's completely fine to do as well. At least you're being active with your grief. You may want to, kind of avoid people as much as possible that day, which is totally understandable, but at least maybe you can take some steps to care for yourself and feed yourself.
Yeah. And, whether that's something, maybe you want to do something, but it just doesn't have anything to do with the holidays. And that's fine.
Absolutely.
It can be, get a pizza with a friend and, watch cartoons. Who knows? Just whatever you want to do that, may not have anything to do with the holidays, but give thought to the fact that you are, again, going to feel that grief on those days. And so then just allowing yourself space to take care of yourself. So important to take care of yourself. We talked about all those ways that grief affects us. And so it's very important to find ways to take care of yourself physically, get good rest. I loved what Erin said about having a self-care day, because grief takes a lot out of us physically and emotionally and spiritually and psychologically. And so having some things that you can do to specifically take care of yourself. A lot of times I get asked, what is the one thing we can do about my grief? What is this one thing I can do that's going to make it all better? And I remind people that with most things in life, with growth and with change, it's little things. It's little and often. And so it's really finding lots of little ways to take care of yourself. Take a walk, get a nap in the afternoon. Try to, tighten up on your eating to where you're focused on eating healthier foods and getting those emotional needs met, spending some time focusing on how you're feeling, maybe journaling, writing, just any of those things that you can do to really care for yourself and your physical body as well as your spiritual body.
I love that idea of just the little things, because we want a big, grand gesture that's going to help us feel better. And unfortunately, there really isn't one. So, a lot of times we do have to do those little things, but they add up to a lot. If you'll do those, if you'll take small steps to take care of yourself, then it can really help you feel a lot better. And, I know there are going to be some people that are listening that are like, yeah, right. Like I can stay in bed all day on this holiday. That's not going to work. Right. So we know that there are people out there like that. So I want to say, remember that you can kind of put a limit on what you're going to do. Even if you feel like I have to do some things, you can accept that your threshold is lower this year. And you can say, I just can't do as much. I'm going to do some things, but I just can't do as much. And like Angela said earlier about, what's really important, I think it can be good when you're writing down your plan to look at your priorities and say, well, this is the number one thing that the family really wants us to do. And then the rest of it is just go with the flow, whatever I can do. I don't have to do, I don't have to make this grand day like normal. So just accepting what you can do, accepting your limits. So.
And giving yourself outs, I think, drive yourself to the event so that if you need to leave early, you can, say, I'm going to stay maybe an hour and then I'm going to leave. I loved a client I heard one time said they created a cry room for the event. They were having Thanksgiving or Christmas, I can't remember which one, and they were worried about how they were going to handle just that much, stimulation really with people. And so they created a room and they put nice blankets and had some candles and nice music playing. And they called it a cry room. And that way they could slip in there if they needed a minute to just kind of get away from everyone. And they said the beautiful thing that happened was that people did slip in there and they started slipping in there together. And before you know it, there's several people in there, and it gave them that permission, again, that elephant in the room, to talk about it and talk about their loved one and cry together and hold each other. And just really beautiful to have that space. And something about creating that space created that permission again to do that and care for yourself.
That's so powerful.
So powerful because it brought them together. It brought them with the elephant, right?
Yes.
Yeah. You reminded me, I had a client who, again, with the limits, was very worried about the whole family gathering and just for a lot of different reasons. And so we worked on identifying, there's just a lot of big personalities in this family and a lot of like what she knew she was going to get a lot of you should be doings and things like that. But it was important to her to show up. And so we talked about, is there one person there that you can be real with? And she was able to identify this person. And again, we were working on this in advance. And we decided that she was going to reach out to that person and they were going to come up with a code word for when it got to be too much. And then that meant we meet in the laundry room. And so that's what they did. And it allowed her to sort of, we talk about dosing our grief all the time, but it allowed her to dose herself with all of this family and all of their expectations. Aaron, you mentioned the expectations earlier that people give to us. And so that code word was really helpful. And that's just something I have really used with a lot of clients since then as just a way of kind of not only accepting the limit, but enforcing the limit. Like I've reached my limit. I need a break.
Yeah, because that can be a very difficult part because other people might not understand, or you may be feeling like you're letting people down when you say I've hit my limit. But you have to take care of yourself.
So we're talking sometimes about families and kind of the whole family is grieving. And again, we've talked about this in other episodes that everyone in our family, we do not all grieve the same, unfortunately. And so there's also experiences where people have told me that they're invited to the family event, but it's very clear that we're not going to grieve at this event, and that we're going to be happy and that kind of a thing. And so I think it's important too, if you're working on your plan, to think about, is our grief going to be open and shareable, or is it something that maybe I have to find time to do this? And I know several clients who have just lit a candle maybe before, if they were having people at their home, and they spent some time and, even say, I'm a big advocate for when you light the candle, I'm lighting this candle in memory of, and saying their names. I think that's so important. And then you can leave that candle lit and nobody in your family has to know, but you are allowing your grief to be present, and you are allowing yourself an opportunity to remember. And so I think we just have to remember that within our families, everybody's grieving. Everyone grieves differently. And it is important, I think, as families to try to find ways to come together, but sometimes that takes a holiday season or two. And so what's important is that we as individuals make sure our grief doesn't get lost in that, that we find small ways to take care of ourselves, those emotional needs.
I love that, because we do recognize that people are not grieving in an ideal world. And in an ideal world, maybe, the family would be open to the grief, and, we could talk about it openly, and people would be there for each other. And in some families, that may be what's happening. In other families, like you said, it may take a holiday season or two before people are comfortable with that, or, the grief may just be so intense that it's really hard to bring to the family gathering. So, you can definitely remember your loved one on your own if you need to, if you know that it's not going to be welcome with the big family. But if you are in a family, or if you are hosting the gathering, and so you are able to kind of set the tone, or if you know that the gathering you're attending is going to be open to it, then there are some options that you can do to welcome your loved one to the holiday. And we really recommend this if it's possible, because it's just a way to take care of your grief during this holiday and share it with others, so that you don't feel so isolated and you're not grieving alone. And it's really important to remember our loved ones. And so this is a way that we can remember them together. So you can invite them to the gathering in certain ways. You can set up a table. I know clients that have done this in the past, where they've set up a little table, maybe, next to where you're going to be sitting together to eat, and put pictures of the loved one out, or people can bring favorite objects of the loved one, or things that remind you of the loved one, and just kind of have a little remembrance table. It can include candles if people want to light a candle in memory. So I just really love that idea of just kind of bringing them into the room where you're going to be celebrating together. Other things that people have done, they have brought an actual chair to the table that is, represents a seat for the loved one that we've lost, and bring them literally to the table with us, or telling stories, about our loved one. I think that's so important. And I think that ends up in laughter just as much as it ends up in tears. I know that's true in my family, that usually, we'll end up laughing about these stories, or just thinking of really uplifting or funny memories of our loved ones that can't be with us. So, and the sky's the limit with this. You can get as creative as you want, and bring that loved one into the holiday with you. And another thing that people can find meaningful, sometimes this is hard when it's early in your grief, but maybe if you've, spent a little time on your grief and you're ready, you can do something to help another person in honor of your loved one. And, that can really bring some comfort during this time, especially if it was maybe a cause that your loved one was really, involved with or interested in. I know of some people that, have started foundations in their loved one's name to give money and volunteer time to causes that were important to their loved one. So, that is something that you can think about. And usually there are a lot of opportunities
Absolutely.
In the community around Thanksgiving for that.
A couple of other ideas that just I always think about this time of the year that people have done. I had a client who, when her mom died, obviously she inherited a lot of her mother's stuff, one of which was the china. And her mother was the type that had the china, but it was never used. Well, they started using it, and it made them laugh. Like, oh, she would not be approving of this.
That's right.
But I love what you said, Erin, about bringing our loved ones to the table. And so that was such a literal thing. They were bringing, mom's china to the table. Something else I think we've done with a lot of families who have younger children is a linking chain. So, which is just getting some construction paper or just regular paper and cutting strips and asking everybody when they come, to write something, either a memory or something they're thankful for of that person who is not there this year, and connect it with, all you need is a stapler.
Yeah.
And I know several families then who have brought that chain to the table and put it on that chair, like you mentioned.
Yes.
And it just helps people, again, as family and friends, they're all grieving. We know that, but we're not going to say it or talk about it, or we're going to do it differently. But it just sort of allows everybody to take that breath of like, okay, we can talk about this. And sometimes I think families find that a little easier when there's something to do, right?
Yes, with your actual hands.
Yes.
You're actually, tangibly putting an object out instead of just, kind of thinking or talking about it. And, I love a good linking chain.
Yes, yes.
And it just reminded me of sometimes it just takes one step to open it up for everyone. Just one person taking one step to say, it's okay to talk about our grief.
Yeah.
And then everyone else will open up. It's almost like they're waiting for someone else to say it first.
Yeah.
And like you said earlier, giving our listeners permission. So we're going to give permission here too of, it's so scary to be the person who takes that step.
Yes.
But it makes everyone, I keep saying that, like collective breath. So if you can be brave enough to take that step to address the grief, to just say it, just get it out there.
Yes.
It really does, in our experience from our families, it makes the day go better than they ever thought it could.
Absolutely. It's like one giant sigh of relief.
Right.
That everybody's been holding in, and they're
Yes.
going to hold it in for the whole event.
Yes.
Unless we can take that breath.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And I think basically what we're also saying here is we want to remind everyone to hold on to hope.
Yes.
Carolyn said this earlier, that your holiday may look and feel different. It's definitely going to look and feel different. But it's not that it's going to be whatever you choose this year. You're not saying this is what we're going to do for eternity. You're just doing it this year so that you can have the best day with your grief, because we do want our grief with us possible. And we do feel like it can be a good day, but we know all these things we've said are really important to help that with having a plan and having support. So just holding on to that hope. And again, we tell our clients all the time, it may be really hard to find hope. And you can certainly borrow it from us.
Yes, absolutely.
So as we wrap up kind of talking about grief with Thanksgiving, we are going to have part 2 of this episode where we're going to talk more about the holidays. But as we kind of wrap up this part 1, let's talk about the importance of support. We've acknowledged that just a little bit, but let's talk about that.
Well, we always say one of the key things to people's grief journey is really having support. And I think many times we each think our support is all wrapped up in one person, whether it's a spouse or a best friend or a parent. Or we kind of tend to think everything we need is wrapped up in this one person. And typically that's not the case. Different people provide support to us in different ways. And so that person that may be the one to sit and listen to you non-judgmentally, and just be with you is probably going to be different than that support when you just need a night out of fun and laughter. And it's probably different people.
Yes.
And so it's important to take a look at all those people in your life and just really determine where that support comes from, what you need, and where that comes from in each person, and then ask them for that. I always tell my clients it's a muscle that we have to work to ask for help, and also, even more importantly, receive it when they give it. Many of us don't like to do that. I understand. I'm guilty of that at times. We don't like to ask for support. We don't feel like we should have to tell people what we need, but they can't read our minds. And so we do need to tell them what we need. Even if it's just, I need you to check in with me every day. Send me a quick text message. On Thanksgiving, I'm going to be with my family and I'm going to need a minute to escape it. And so I need to just have a quick text conversation with you, my friend, during that time, or have a quick phone call to just kind of get me through. Tell people what you need, because honestly, people are so looking for ways to help you, and they love you. And loss makes people feel like they have no control and somewhat helpless. And your friends and those that love you feel that way because they want it to be better. They want to fix it. They want to help. And yet, there's nothing they can do to fix it. But there are ways they can support by doing tangible things, going to the grocery store for you, dropping off whatever you need, watching kids for you. Or it could be, like I said, simple. I need to go out and get coffee with you before all the festivities start. But whatever that is, just finding ways to fill those needs of support through all the people in your life. And they will be so grateful to have had the opportunity to do something that really helps you and that they know you want.
Yes,
absolutely. Well, as we truly wrap up, I'm going to ask each of you, what is the one thing you think people need to remember about grief and Thanksgiving? And so while you think, I'm going to share mine, and it's probably going to seem really simple, but it's something that we've talked about here, is I really hope that you listeners will acknowledge that you are grieving this year and that there is a very important missing piece of your holiday. I think that is just one of the most basic things. If you need to do a sticky note, but just remind yourself, say out loud, I am grieving. And other family and friends are grieving as well in different ways, as we talked about. And I just really believe that this acknowledgement, while it brings the grief to the forefront, it also allows you to breathe through the moment. And as always, remember that the Baptist Centers for Good Grief is available for support for you. So what would each of you want to share about Thanksgiving?
Well, it's somewhat along those lines, but I guess I would say is to let go of the expectation. Let go of the expectation, the guilt, the shame, the regret, the have-tos, the should-haves, and just allow yourself to be where you are. Grief is one of those things. That's not a comfortable position for most of us. We like to keep moving. Grief is something you have to sit with sometimes, and the holidays are no different. Allowing yourself just to be where you are and just take it one moment at a time. As the feelings come up, if the moment of joy appears, enjoy it. Let yourself enjoy it. If the moment of sadness is there, cry. If you're angry, scream. Tell someone. But just allow yourself to be where you are.
I love that. Just to piggyback off of that, I think, just permission to do what you need to do. We get so wrapped up in we have to do these things a certain way at a certain time for certain people. And, just giving yourself permission to do what you need to do, to grieve, and to get through this one holiday. It's not all the holidays. It's just this one holiday. Do what you need to do to get through this one. And you can tackle the next one when it comes. It's just this one holiday this year.
And that's a perfect segue. So for those of you that are listening, just this Thanksgiving. We're going to have part 2 of this episode where we'll talk about the next round of holidays. Thank you, Carolyn and Aaron. I am just so honored to know both of you and so privileged to work with you also. To our listeners, grief does heal. Let me say that again, grief does heal. Grief demands attention and care, especially during the holidays. Remember that your grief is a reflection of your love and that you are not alone. The world is full of grievers like you. You can learn more about us at www.baptistgriefcenters.org. You can visit our YouTube channel, Baptist Centers for Good Grief, and you can always come back for the next episode of our podcast. Remember, grief is real, big, better shared. We'll talk soon.